The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Osmond Farrell is a professor of communication studies at Montgomery College, Rockville, where he teaches mostly business and professional communication, foundation of human communication, and public speaking courses. He is a former Pew Faculty Fellow and is also a recipient of the Teaching Leadership Award from the University of Colorado. Professor Farrell holds a BA in journalism from the University of the Virgin Islands, an MA in mass communication, and a Ph.D. in human communication studies from Howard University. His research interests include the role of media in society, intercultural communication, interpersonal communication, and creating effective learning environments.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here, especially the new faculty fellows. You guys are in for a great ride. This was actually perhaps the most, I would say it was the most rewarding professional growth program that I have done. It was really, really great. My only issue was not being able to do it more than once, but it was really great. So Sarah, Mimi, and Denise, thanks. A couple of years ago, I started noticing that students were becoming a little intolerant of speeches which had an opposing views to their own. And in my public speaking class of all classes, and so central to public speaking, at least that course, is the issue of freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is a fundamental American right and a human right, so no place should it be more valued and protected than in our classrooms. So when I saw our theme, We the People, America's Grand and Radical Experiment with Democracy, I decided this was a great opportunity to cultivate open-mindedness and tolerance for other viewpoints. Early in my class, very early last semester, I asked, how many of you believe in freedom of speech? Everyone raised their hand. And then I showed a series of short video clips and documentaries dealing with microaggression, free speech zones, and democracy, and some were hurtful and, I must admit, offensive, but they actually met the parameters of freedom of speech. And yet still, when I showed those videos and I asked, how many of you believe those people should be restricted or prevented from actually voicing or espousing such views? Almost everyone raised their hand. So we decided to actually investigate or research what is the First Amendment, more specifically as it relates to freedom of speech. And in the end, this is what we arrived at, based mostly from our text. Even hateful and offensive speech is protected as long as they do not cross the line into harassment or threats or create clearly hostile environment to vulnerable citizens. With few exceptions, speakers have an almost unlimited right of free expression. To ground students in the historical nature and struggles that minority viewpoints and unpopular opinions had, we visited the National Museum of American History. Students had to select five, well actually let me say this, I actually steered them to what exhibit to look at, and it was mostly looking at items from American Democracy, A Great Leap of Faith, and Many Voices, One Nation. They had to identify 5 objects associated with free speech and American democracy, complete museum visit handout, participate in class discussion, share experiences, and use objects to inform their persuasive, informative, and final speeches. This is what guided my students. What surprised you on this visit? List the 5 objects you selected to view. Why did you select these objects as subjects for your speeches? This one was especially important. How was the object you selected regarded at that time? Why? And they focus on how women, blacks, and other minorities were regarded at that time, and how their opinions were dismissed or restricted. And then I would ask, what if it were you? How would you feel? How would you feel if your opinions were dismissed out of hand and you were not allowed to participate fully in this American democracy? And that's when I got them thinking, well, the same way I did not like, the same way I was actually suggesting that I should restrict these speeches, maybe mine would have been restricted also, and I wouldn't like that. So at least it got them thinking. In terms of the actual experience, this is not, I think it was just about 12 here. A total of 15 actually made this visit with me on September 21st. I decided to do it early because this course, at the core of, the centerpiece for my project was the National Museum of American History. And it actually took the entire semester. It was a semester-long project. Some of the activities, if you would notice, students gravitated to those items or those things that related to, they could easily relate to or connect with. I'm going to come back to this picture because if you would notice, this is, can you pass this American citizenship test? And there was a reason why I selected that as one. We asked them to take their kids, as you can see from earlier, if they were so inclined. And let me show you some of the kids in action. They actually, as you can see, we had a great time. Now, one of the, this is coming from one of my students. What was special to me was being able to bring both of my boys and share with the rest of my classmates important objects that help shape American democracy as we know it. If you can see in the background, lobbying. She is a dreamer, and she is actually involved in lobbying to get DACA passed. And if you go back, if we were to go back to this picture, one more forward, yeah, I got it. This is the picture where she, I'm assuming, is hoping that one day she would become a citizen, because she has been talking about that for quite a while. Yeah, I got it, thanks. Yes, another experience, Monsongo. What surprised me on my visit to the Smithsonian was how there were so many kids at the museum. It felt good to see the young generation interested in learning more about their country's history. I personally learned more about freedom of speech on this visit because so much of what I saw have had a significant impact on our lives. This was my first Smithsonian Museum visit, and I would love to go back and explore more of the exhibits. He wrote on Poor People's March. He wrote on civil rights, and he just did a really fabulous job. Another student, Ashley. My favorite part of visiting the museum was seeing the exhibit with all the protest posters. As an African-American woman who has taken part in protests, seeing that impacted me. And we could go on. Bogdan talk about the intolerance of the Ku Klux Klan, some other museum experience. I wouldn't use the word relics, but that's it is. these were the deliverables. And all of my class objectives nicely aligned with the activities. For example, for the informative speech, they had to select a historical NMAH object, provide annotated bibliography, full sentence outline, prepare and present a 4 to 5 minute speech, and use a visual aid of them posing with their object or artifact and incorporate that into their speech as their visual aid. The informative speech was not the problem, but the persuasive speech, this is where I normally have strong views because, you know, it's partisan. And as such, I had students, before I even got into that, I had students, they were placed in a group and they were told, come up with what you believe should be code of ethics for classroom speeches. You come up with these. Once you come up with these, you are the one who actually created them, so you have to abide by them. And I found they were more committed once they were the ones who came up with those guidelines. And here is the guideline they came up with. Responsibilities of the speaker: make sure your goals are ethically sound, be fully prepared for each speech, be honest in what you say, avoid name calling and other forms of abusive language. And you as the listener, listening is not passive. And critical listening is a major part, is one of the main goals or objective of public speaking come 121. So they were required to be courteous and attentive, avoid prejudging the speaker, and most of all, maintain the free and open expression of ideas. Let's go back to persuasive speech. Trying to get there. For the persuasive speech, they could select one of those historical object, or they could use a contemporary figure. And they had to do quite a bit of research, provide full sentence, and all of these other stuff. But what was so much different is that because this causes great disagreement, or you actually, this is where I normally have students actually, the intolerance will show. I have cut out some of the other items, you know, in the essence of time. And because the other part of this survey actually dealt with content, delivery, and organization. So this is the descriptive or qualitative aspect of their speech. It was from this that I would glean their intolerance, especially this one. What I did notice too was that if they were in favor of a speech, position, not the quality, then it correlated with a good grade. And if they did not like that viewpoint, conversely, they received a bad grade. Fortunately for those students, I'm the one who assigns grade. So they were okay, but this is where I would normally see that. Going back to the, let me get back one. Oh, one, come down one, forward one, please. Okay, I got it, thanks. For the final speech, they had to select contemporary or historical figure. They had to provide the same information, annotated bibliography, full sentence outline, prepare and present 7 to 8 minute speech. Visual aid from the museum visit, if that's what they chose. Extemporaneous delivery. But then they had to do a content analysis. And the goal was not just to quantify themes or techniques or patterns, but to link those results with the context and the environment at that time. So for example, some students, by the way, the speaker could impact our democracy for good or ill. So I had one student selecting George Wallace, and they had George Wallace in the category of impacting our democracy for bad. And then others might have selected, let's say, Martin Luther King. But some also had some contemporary figures. I'm not certain if I want to go into who those figures might be, but you could guess whether it's the Alex Jones or current occupants of certain high places. but that's what they did.
Forward?
Yes, please. Okay, I think it's advancing sometimes. What were the consequences? Well, my intention was to ensure that, or to, as far as possible, create more open-mindedness and also cultivate more tolerance for people with divergent viewpoints. But it was also meant to show that by repressing viewpoints and unpopular opinions throughout US history, we have not had a good record, because when that were done, it was actually used to keep women off the public platforms until the 1840s to stop abolitionists from exposing the evils of slavery before the Civil War, Muslim labor organizers during the 1890s, and more recently to impede civil rights during the 1960s. The last assignment was an essay. They were asked to suggest what would American democracy look like if these speakers were not allowed, were silenced. My takeaways, major takeaways, based largely on their peer evaluation and class discussion, the student actually realized the merits of freedom of speech, and they would state that. They acknowledge that they can disagree entirely with the speaker's message, but still support the speaker's right to express it. And often I would tell them, I don't agree with that. That's racist, or that's homophobic. But do they have a right? Yes, according to what you guys agreed, is the First Amendment, and more specifically, freedom of speech. They have every right to do that. So they became more aware of the resources at the Smithsonian in documenting, educating, and shaping history. And about the visit, it was extremely useful. Students actually did more than the traditional COM 121 class does. For example, the Code of Ethics. For example, that essay. And there were some other items, and they did not complain. When they felt connected to the item and it could relate in their life, it was more meaningful, and they were able to concretize abstract concepts such as freedom of speech and democracy, and it meant a lot. In fact, I believe that they understood the words of Colin Powell when he said at the 1994 Howard University commencement, freedom of speech means permitting the widest range of views to be presented, however controversial those views may be. The First Amendment right of free speech is intended to protect the controversial, and even the outrageous word are not just comforting platitudes too mundane to need protection.